In the first video, we explored the first 11 chapters of Genesis and how they set the foundation for the biblical story. God created all things and made humans in His image to rule the world in His name. However, humans chose sin and rebellion, plunging the world into a cycle of violence and death, ultimately leading to the scattering of the people in Babylon. The big question that arises is, what will God do to restore and redeem His world? The answer begins with a man named Abram, later known as Abraham. From the scattering in Babylon, the biblical text focuses on just one family lineage, culminating in Abraham. At the beginning of chapter 12, God makes a promise to him, initiating a new movement in history. God calls Abraham to leave his land and go to Canaan, which would one day be his. He promises to make him a great nation, to make his name great, and to bless him. This promise is connected to the earlier events in Genesis. While Babylon sought its own glory arrogantly, God, in His grace, chooses to give a great name to a simple man. But why did God choose to bless Abraham and his descendants? The answer lies in the final part of the promise. Through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. This is a central point to understanding the biblical story. God plans to save and restore the rebellious world through the lineage of Abraham. This explains why the entire Old Testament focuses on the people of Israel. Israel is called to be a kingdom of priests, a people chosen to reveal to the world who God is. The biblical prophets and poets emphasize that this promise would be fulfilled through a future messianic king, whose reign would bring justice and peace to all nations. But at this moment in history, none of this is clear. The narrative follows Abraham, then his son Isaac, then Jacob, and finally, the 12 sons of Jacob. Each generation repeats the same mistakes. They make poor decisions that put the divine promise at risk. Yet, God remains faithful, saving them from their own failures, and reaffirming His commitment to use them to bless the world. Abraham, for example, faces challenges and fears. On 2 occasions, he lies about his wife to protect his own life, causing problems. Also, because he cannot have children with Sarah, he agrees to have an heir with his servant, which leads to significant family conflicts. But God continues to intervene and reaffirm His promise. In chapters 15 to 17, God formalizes His covenant with Abraham. In a memorable scene, God asks Abraham to look at the sky and count the stars, assuring him that his descendants will be as numerous as them. Even without children and with no hope in sight, Abraham believes the promise, and God seals this faith with a covenant, establishing circumcision as a permanent sign of His commitment. Jacob's story is marked by deception and twists. From birth, he lives up to his name, which means deceiver. He steals his brother Esau's birthright and blessing, deceives his blind father, and runs away. However, throughout his life, he too is deceived and undergoes great trials. At the lowest point of his journey, he has a mysterious encounter with God, wrestling with Him throughout the night and demanding a blessing. God then changes his name to Israel, which means the one who wrestles with God, and confirms that he will carry the promise of Abraham. The story of Jacob's sons culminates in Joseph, who becomes the central figure in the final chapters of Genesis. Out of jealousy, his brothers sell him as a slave to Egypt, where he ends up unjustly imprisoned. But God remains with him. Joseph rises to become the second most powerful man in Egypt and, in an act of redemption, saves his family from famine. When he reunites with his brothers, he says, "You planned evil against me, but God turned it into good to save many lives." This phrase sums up the entire narrative of Genesis. Humanity errs, but God remains faithful and redemptive. Additionally, the author of Genesis connects the promise of the descendant who would crush the serpent, from Genesis 3, to the lineage of Abraham. In chapter 49, Jacob prophesies that a king will arise from the tribe of Judah, who will rule over all nations and bring divine restoration to the world. The book ends with Jacob's family settled in Egypt, full of hopes and promises for the future. But everything remains in suspense. What will happen to Abraham's lineage? How will God fulfill his promise? To find out, we need to turn the page and continue the story. That was the book of Genesis. But the journey has only just begun. And if you enjoyed this video, like, share, and subscribe for more content like this.